We are all taught to wait for it, that electric, sudden jolt when two people lock eyes across a crowded room and the rest of the world just fades to background noise. We call it a spark. We call it fate. But that feeling of destiny is an illusion. It is actually a highly predictable mechanical cascade of neurochemicals flooding your brain on a very specific cue. The most intensely magnetic people you will ever meet do not leave attraction to chance. Without even realizing it, they deploy a specific set of psychological triggers that engineer this exact chemical reaction in the people around them. If you do not know what these triggers are, you are walking into every social interaction completely blind, operating entirely at the mercy of your own involuntary biology. By pulling back the curtain on this dark architecture of attraction, love stops being a chaotic game of roulette. It becomes a system of psychological influence that anyone can master. When you meet someone new, your brain does not immediately look for romance. Its baseline state is defensive. It scans for threats, operating on a primitive stranger danger reflex that must be actively bypassed. The most effective way past that neurological security system is a technique called mirroring. This is the subtle, unconscious mimicry of another person's body language, vocal cadence, and breathing patterns. This abstract diagram shows exactly how that feedback loop operates. When the brain detects its own behavioral inputs reflected back at it, it lowers its guard. This bypasses the threat response and signals that the person in front of you is a safe, familiar presence. But familiarity alone breeds comfort, not obsession. To trigger deep attraction, that comfort must be counterbalanced with mystery, the deliberate, strategic withholding of personal information. The human brain cannot tolerate an information vacuum. When you leave intentional blank spaces in your story, the other person's predictive processing is forced into overdrive to account for the missing data. Pair that high level of mirrored trust with a constant hum of unresolved intrigue, and you create a cognitive trap. Their brain is physically forced to fixate on you. Getting someone to fixate on you is only the first step. The architecture gets much darker when we observe how that initial interest is manufactured into a deep, urgent craving. It comes down to scarcity. The exact same economic principles of supply and demand that govern global markets also govern human desire. Look at this data visualization mapping availability against neurological valuation. From an evolutionary standpoint, the human brain automatically equates low availability and difficult attainment with high survival value. Notice what happens right here. A sudden withdrawal of your attention triggers a mild panic in their reward center. The brain registers a deficit and forces them to prioritize acquiring your attention above everything else. Strategic scarcity creates a biological pressure that artificially inflates your value. It moves you from an optional social luxury to a psychological necessity. Which brings us to the final, most intensive level of this architecture, escalating a craving into a full neurological dependency. The mechanism for this is called intermittent reinforcement. It is the exact same psychological conditioning protocol that makes casino slot machines violently addictive. This graph illustrates the effect clearly. If you provide steady, predictable affection, dopamine levels eventually flatline. But if you alternate intense warmth with unpredictable coldness, you create these towering, erratic spikes in dopamine production. The brain rapidly stops responding to the affection itself and instead becomes biochemically addicted to the chase. It is deep down in these troughs, between the highs, where uncontrollable craving and dependency are formed. You pair that cycle with emotional anchoring, tactically ensuring your presence during their highest emotional peaks to cement an unbreakable bond. This potent cocktail of unpredictable dopamine hits and anchored emotional highs bypasses logic entirely. It shifts the brain's focus from objective assessment to the singular pursuit of the next chemical high. The illusion of romantic fate has been stripped away. Behind the poetry and the starlight is the stark, mechanical reality of human connection. Knowing how these levers work carries a heavy moral weight. These are profound psychological tools with the very real potential for manipulation and control. Choosing to look away and remain ignorant of these mechanics does not make you noble. It simply makes you a vulnerable, passive participant in your own relationships. Recognizing the patterns of mirroring, scarcity, and intermittent reinforcement serves as a psychological immune system. It protects you from those who use these tactics to influence your decisions without your consent. Mastering the dark architecture of attraction provides a significant leverage. It grants you absolute sovereignty over who you fall for and the power to command the deepest attention of others.